This is the new generation Ford Everest and it's in sport grade. It has plenty of potential as a family vehicle and a recreational tourer. But how does it actually go off-road? Well, that's what we're here to find out, which is why we're going to pit it against the Mitsubishi Pajero Sport in GSR spec and the Isuzu MU-X in LST spec. Now, both of these things are well equipped and very popular. So this is going to be interesting. Let's see how they go. Now take note, this is a four-wheel drive comparison only, so no chat about pricing, features or safety or warranty. This is four-wheel driving pure and simple. And remember, for even more details about these vehicles, make sure you read my full written review at carsguide.com.au. The Everest Sport has the 3-litre V6 turbo diesel engine that everyone is going so gaga about, and for good reason, because it produces 184 kilowatts and a whopping 600 newton meters. Now, it's the beast to beat in this trio in terms of power and torque figures, but let's see how it fares in the real world. It has a 10-speed automatic transmission, and that's been redeveloped since the last generation, and again, let's see how it does on the rough stuff. The Isuzu MU-X has the 3-litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine that has proven itself in the past. That produces 140 kilowatts and 450 newton meters, and it's matched to a 6-speed automatic transmission. And while not the most dynamic combination around, it's certainly proven itself in the past. The Pajero Sport has a 2.4-litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine. It produces 133 kilowatts and 430 newton meters, and it's matched to an 8-speed automatic transmission. Now, while not the most dynamic combination around, it has certainly proven itself in the past. But enough chit-chat, let's hit the tracks. There is really a lot to like about the Pajero Sport, and not the least of which is its Super Select 4-wheel drive 2 system. Now, while that name is a bit of a mouthful, it really is quite handy when it comes to 4-wheel driving. It gives you the option of operating the vehicle in 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive high range, but that also is an all-wheel drive type system because you can use that on high traction surfaces. And as well as those, you have 4-wheel drive high range with a lock center diff and 4-wheel drive low range also with a lock diff. Ride and handling are pretty well sorted, and that suspension does okay to soak up lumps and bumps as you go. And while the Pajero Sport is not the torquiest 4-wheel drive in this trio, it still does pretty well when you're off-roading. Low range gearing is decent, there's plenty of visibility out of the front and down the sides and to the back of the vehicle. And all the mechanicals and all the driver assist tech, while they're not as whiz-bang fancy as they are perhaps in the Everest Sport, they are very effective. And because the Pajero Sport is lighter and has a smaller footprint on the dirt, it can tend to feel a little bit free and easy when the going gets really tough through corrugations and deeper wheel ruts. And the Pajero Sport feels quite nimble and quite agile through the bush because it sits on a short wheelbase and it's that much easier to steer around. And while it does feel a tad bit old, especially in this company against the Everest and the MU-X, it still does pretty well, and for that you can't count out the Pajero Sport. Generally, its off-road angles are pretty good. I'm talking about approach, departure, and ramp over angles, but the Pajero Sport is somewhat undone by its ground clearance. It's the lowest of the three vehicles here. I think it's about 218 mil. So you have to drive with consideration and you have to drive with care, but that's a pretty good general rule if you're driving any four-wheel drive in tough stuff. And remember, in this wagon, as well as pretty decent low range gearing, you do have selectable off-road modes, so gravel tracks, sand, mud and ruts, that sort of thing. And you do have the diff locks, the center diff lock, which locks automatically, and the rear diff lock, which you can engage yourself. So all in all, the Pajero Sport does pretty well in what is really an aging platform, and especially compared to the other two wagons in this test. I've always had a soft spot for the Isuzus, for the D-Max, and then the MU-X, the wagon based on the D-Max Ute, because they're no-nonsense vehicles. There's no fuss about them. They may not be the most exciting thing around, and they may not be the liveliest thing to drive or the most dynamic, but there's just something about them that appeals to me. It's just that truck-like, get through anything approach. And it does still sound like a bit of a truck. I'll give you the drum. There is a little bit of engine noise coming into the cabin, but I don't mind that, and I think that's part of the MU-X's charm. And also part of its undeniable charm is the fact that it is very impressive off-road. It's got good four-wheel drive mechanicals, it's got sound low-range gearing, it's got a decent off-road traction control system that's been recalibrated through the last couple of phases to really get it on point at the moment, or at least better than it used to be. And it has a rear diff lock, and all of those things combine to make the MU-X really quite effective off-road. But there are a few negatives. For one, the tyres, they need to be more aggressive all-terrains, because they really do gum up with the slippery clay mud we've been in here on this test, and they don't provide the all-round aggressive traction that you can have in a better set of tyres. But that's an easy fix. You just get some better rubber. But another thing is the suspension. It's not terrible, even over corrugated dirt tracks, but it does need to be sorted out a little bit. And the underside of the MU-X does feel a little bit prone to rubbing on even arbitrary lumps and bumps when you're getting stuck into low range four-wheel driving. You have to drive to take that into account, but that's fine, because all good four-wheel driving, all safe four-wheel driving is at a slow, safe momentum. And another crucial thing in the MU-X's favour is the fact that it has really sound low and mid-range torque, and that makes low-speed four-wheel driving a real stress-free experience. The MU-X has the best ground clearance of these three vehicles, and it has been the only one to get up and over our steep rock steps without scraping the belly, so it's got to get a tick of approval for that. This is a very effective four-wheel drive, and it can handle most situations without any fuss. It's got that seamless combination of mechanicals and driver assist tech, and it all works really well. It all works really smoothly. One of the nice things about the Everest's four-wheel drive system is the fact you can drive it in 4-auto, so you can leave it in four-wheel drive essentially all the time. It acts as an all-wheel drive system, so you can use that on high traction surfaces. And it does move quite smoothly through deeper ruts and even corrugations that get a bit more severe here and there. It's got a nice controlled feel about the ride and handling. But there is no denying this is a big vehicle, and it's quite hamstrung by its dimensions. It feels pretty big to steer in and around the bush tracks, especially when they get a little bit squeezier. And while its ground clearance and its off-road angles aren't atrocious, they aren't ideal either. They're far from it, in fact. And for that reason, the Everest Sport's undercarriage feels a bit more prone, a bit more vulnerable to scraping on the dirt and even going through arbitrary obstacles and ruts. And while the Everest Sport is handicapped by its sheer physical size, it does make really good use of its driver assist tech. It has selectable off-road modes like sand and mud and ruts and rocks, and they tweak engine output and throttle control, that sort of thing, to help you out to suit the conditions you're on. But beyond that, it also has a rear diff lock, and it has a pretty well calibrated off-road traction control system. Its 20-inch wheel and tyre combination are far from ideal for off-roading as well, so if you were going to use your Everest Sport as an adventure touring vehicle, then you would quickly replace the standard tyres. You would also look at sorting out the suspension, getting a little bit of a lift, maybe 2 inches or so, just to give it a little bit more of an edge when it comes to rough terrain. The Everest Sport offers everything, anything you could want at your fingertips in terms of four-wheel driving efficacy, but it's almost too clinical. It feels like you're one or two steps removed from the process. And I like to feel involved in the driving. I like it to be a visceral, hands-on, head out the window experience. There's no denying this is a great family touring vehicle, and it could possibly be a great towing vehicle, but for me it's just a little bit too clinical in four-wheel drive terms. And after all, it is somewhat handicapped by its sheer physical size. On screen now, the official fuel consumption figures on a combined cycle for all of these four-wheel drive wagons. I'll give you a second or two to wrap your head around those. Now, you would assume that that big V6 would use a lot more go juice than the other two, and it turns out it has. So there you have it, three very impressive four-wheel drive wagons, each with real-world off-road capability. But for me, in this test, it has to be the Isuzu MU-X. It's just that much more comfortably capable than the other two in this test. That's not to take anything away from the Everest. It has so much driver assist tech, the mechanicals are so good, but it is hamstrung by its physical dimensions. And as for the Pajero Sport, that is still a very impressive off-roader, even if it's feeling a tiny bit old. But what do you reckon? Have your say in the comments section below.